and broader than that, because the things had happened. And
in my country, if you miss internet for 2 hours, you might not be qualified for talking to press.
good evening from our headquarters in Kiev. This is This Sunday Show at Hromadske International, the only prime-time English-speaking program explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm, and I'm Natalia Humenyuk. It's 1 week since Volodymyr Zelenskyy is the president of Ukraine, but we are already expecting a snap elections in 2 months. There is a lot to say and assess, and therefore we have a great panel with us in order to discuss what had happened during this week, the first appointments, what we can expect with the elections, who would be the powers running Ukraine after the elections, and as well all other details. So we have a very diverse panel. We have Yegor Polyakov, who is an analyst of a NGO Centre UA, which is a watchdog organization also looking at the election and can discuss what is the controversy there and what to expect. Oleh Rybachuk also representing the same organization, but Oleh used to be the chief of staff, the head of the president administration during the time of Yushchenko. So probably I definitely will ask you, what's this position mean with all the controversy regarding the current head of president administrations? And James Brooke is an editor-in-chief of Ukraine Business News. So we're looking to hear from you what foreign investors ideas and what are the concerns. And Ivan Verstyuk is a journalist of the Novoe Vremya magazine and a person who was writing about Volodymyr Zelenskyy way before he announced that he would run. So I suggest we start the discussion also with looking at the first inauguration statement of Volodymyr Zelenskyy, just to remind us. It feels like it was a while ago, though it was just this Monday.
From today onward, each one of us has responsibility for the Ukraine that we leave behind for our children. Each one of us, being in their jobs, can do everything in their power for the development of Ukraine. A European country starts with each of us. I address all the Ukrainians in the world. There is 65 million of us. Don't be so surprised. Yes, there are 65 million of us. All those who were brought to life by the Ukrainian land. The Ukrainians in Europe and Asia, in North and South America, in Australia and Africa. I address all the Ukrainians on this planet. We really need you, all those who are prepared to build a new, strong and successful Ukraine. I will happily provide you with a Ukrainian citizenship. You shouldn't be coming to visit Ukraine, you should be coming home. We're waiting for you. Don't bring souvenirs from abroad. Please bring your knowledge, experience, and mental values instead. I've often been asked what I'm prepared to do in order to stop fire. It's a strange question. What are you, the Ukrainians, prepared to lose for the lives of the people close to you? What? I can assure you that in order for our heroes to stop dying, I'm ready to do everything. And I'm definitely not afraid to make difficult decisions, not afraid to lose my own popularity, my ratings. And if there's a need, I'm prepared to give up my own position, as long as peace arrives. but without giving up our territories. Ever. Of course, apart from the war, there are many other problems here that make Ukrainians unhappy. I'm talking about the shocking tariffs, humiliating salaries and pensions, painful prices, the absence of job opportunities. It's the healthcare, the improvement of which is only talked about by those who never had to stay in a regular hospital with a child. It's the infamous Ukrainian roads that are only being repaired inside someone's imagination. And to be honest, I don't understand our government when all it does is shrugs and says there's nothing we can do. That's not true. You can. You can take a piece of paper and a pen and free your seats in favor of all those who will think about the next generations and not about the next elections. I think that the people will appreciate this step. My election as a president only proves that the citizens are tired of the experienced politicians who over the past 28 years created a country of opportunities. Opportunities to steal, bribe and loot. Let's build a country of other opportunities, where everybody is equal before the law and where the rules of the game are honest and transparent, that are same for everyone.
Okay, so that's to remind that it's not just about this week events, but what are your main things to understand about Zelenskyy already as a president and where we should look at?
Who starts?
You start.
Okay, so I have major point. Zelenskyy was elected because he said that I would never play the game all Ukrainian politicians played. You would see I would be very different. I promise, I guarantee I would kill the goddamn system and you will see very different. I would consult with you. I would make sure that there are no oligarchic influences. And he started from 10 important reforms on his inauguration speech. He concentrated just on 3. One of these 3 was election reform. For our viewers to understand, we have so-called hybrid election system where half of the parliament is elected on the so-called closed party system, half of the parliament on constituencies. The problem here is that it was introduced by President Yanukovych and it allows people with big money, it guarantees. There is like exchange, you know the price, you know whom to call. It guarantees for rich people to buy the constituency mandate or to buy place in the party list. And Zelenskyy, promised to change it. 2 days after his speech, when he had consultations with politicians whom he doesn't want to remind, suddenly he presented on his behalf the system which has nothing to do with open one. He chosen the closed one, so he chosen the corrupted political system with which you cannot deliver any of his previous promises. I think this is the major problem as on today.
We'll get into the discussion on the election because I guess it's important to explain how they would work because they will happen, Ivan. The major take.
Zelenskyy, Ukraine's now president, he wants to be the leader of the changes. He clearly realizes that most Ukrainians are fed up with how things are done in Ukrainian politics. There are too many reasons for frustrations. Very basic example. For instance, President Petro Poroshenko, Zelenskyy's predecessor, was always saying that he supports the land market reform, while his faction in parliament always voted against the land market. Such a controversy...
Same story with election reform and Poroshenko.
Exactly. Such a controversy disappoints Ukrainians because Ukraine is an agricultural country with agricultural sector up to like 30% of GDP. It's extremely important. And there are a lot of many other examples. People were fed up that the IMF requirements are not being followed at the pace that they're supposed to be followed. But it's hard to be a leader of the change. The reason is because if you want to be the change maker, the pace of the changes should be very high. You can't do a reform every 3 months. You have to pass a reform every month. These are the expectations of Zelenskyy's voters. And I think the reason why he dismissed the parliament was because he wanted to fulfill his election promises as fast as he could for his voters, for the 73% of Ukrainians who supported him.
James, as about the foreign investors and generally people looking at the business size of the things, are the major concerns and as well expectations? Because like 1 week is too little, but
7 days.
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine said that Zelenskyy is the first post-Soviet leader. So we've been through the post-Soviet leaders, now he's the first post-Soviet leader. And he's made a priority of cleaning up the judicial system, which is key for foreign investment, any kind of investment. I think on the political front, it's great to have the elections moved up. The problem is, I think that half the country will be on vacation or having summer jobs in the EU, and they will maybe not be here, not be voting. The other point is, it was a great inauguration speech, which I watched in Mariinsky Park, and we just watched on TV.
Ah, you've been there?
I was at Mariinsky Park. I wasn't inside. Yeah, and people were applauding, and people were very happy. It was a good mixed group. There were older people, younger people, and the Rada deliberately did it on Monday to keep the turnout down. If it had been on Sunday, there would have been 50,000 people there. But will the turnout be in 2 months? And then my huge problem is the Kolomoisky factor, and we can get into that a little later, maybe.
we'll definitely get into the Kolomoisky factor. There is no way, so please stay tuned. And as well, follow all our publication at hromadsky.ua and our Twitter and Facebook. So there are all the things there. So Yegor, in particular, since your organization is doing kind of a watchdog of the elections, maybe can you explain on the on our audience this controversy regarding the lists? I would probably also remind you, will see now a photo that indeed on the second day of his being a president, Zelenskyy met the leaders of the factions, and they made a deal that they would come back to the earlier system without the so-called constituency candidates, first past the post, which Oleh Rybachuk just explained as a way to buy corrupt places in the parliament. So they agreed to something else, to kind of coming back. It's still unclear, very much unclear, who suggested what in the very beginning, but then when the parties come out of the room, the next day, nothing had happened. The deal hadn't been met, and
it was not supported by parliament.
It wasn't supported, and even like they stayed with what we have. Still, let us understand where the generally was an opportunity to change the system, because the elections were planned for October, and what could be done to improve that? So what is your take on the whole?
I guess I have 2 points. First one about Zelenskyy in general, that he is sending mixed messages. So one time he says, I will never get my friends into the power. On the other day after he got elected, most of people who he has appointed are actually his friends. Once he said, I need open lists proportional system. Next day, he proposes the closed lists. The problem about the implementation of the reform, if we have been gone to open lists, is that it never work if we go for snap elections. It should have been in October for parties and for people to get ready to the new system. What happened, I don't think that the snap elections will be cancelled by the Constitutional Court. So let it go, mixed system. Just please do your...
I probably just ask, just go on, I'll ask our team to show this distribution of seats in the parliament, how it works, according to the current system.
So the problem is, I see 2 problems. First one is low turnout, as was mentioned. The second one is, I'm not sure that Central Election Committee will be able to go through the procurement procedures. We have 2 risks that may delegitimize the elections. Either it will not happen just because there will be no ballots physically on the one side, or we will lack in local polls, in local councils, there will not be observers and members of the poll teams, or we will just have such a low turnout that the results will not be representative. What about the system? Why is it always better for the president in power? Because if president in power has some time to introduce his team in the fields to gather the majoritarian candidates that were working for some time on their territories, he can engage them into future coalition even if he does not have a big support for his party. The problem is that for Zelensky is that if he had that closed lists, he probably had much better results, and that is why he proposed that system, and that is why he tried to ask politely our current member of parliaments to enforce this new legislation.
Can I just get a short view of yours, because there is some real politics in that. Like real politic in that it's really like, would you like to enforce the change? Because I know that the puristic approach of many civil society organizations, which I respect, that the law can't be, like the principles are principles from the first day, but there is this discussion that, like what Ivan mentioned, that if you don't start without the parliament, this president can't do anything. So do you really think that it was possible not to have the snap elections, and what we can imagine the life with Zelensky, with this parliament for the next 5-6 months?
I think it's great that he is having snap elections, and he's obviously trying to lock in, and your polls will show that he's got huge public support.
I think while Zelensky's team was preparing this snap elections message, there were many last-minute decisions. Zelensky was very indecisive. I mean, he did understand that his voters are expecting snap elections, but he was wondering whether his team could handle 2 elections in a 3-month period. But probably his consultants convinced him that they should do it, that that's the way to go. Otherwise, Zelensky wouldn't have cabinet of ministers he needs for those changes he promised.
So probably then let's look at the latest polls, which were conducted by the sociological group Rating from May 16 to May 21st, with 2,000 responders and the error margin of a bit more than 2%. So we see that even without the party list, just tomorrow, this Monday, we will hear what will be with the party. Dmytro Razumkov would run this list. So the Servant of the People has up to 44%. The opposition platform for Life with Rabinovich and Medvedchuk, controversial figures which are considered to be pro-Russian leaning politicians, 10%. Petro Poroshenko bloc, they've just changed the name for European Solidarity. It's almost 9%. Yulia Tymoshenko with Batkivshina, 7%. Igor Zmishko, quite a newcomer for a lot of people, but a former representative of the security service, 5%, and the new announced party of Sviatoslav Vakarchuk, Voice, already 4.6%, Radical Party of Leshko, 3%, Opposition Bloc, 3.2%. So, which shows that somehow any system favors Zelensky, and we don't see many parties there. We don't see Narodny Front, the biggest opposition party in the current government. We don't see still these young parties there. They are not yet created. We don't see like Hrytsenko party. So generally, what do you make of this poll? And if to remind that it looks like it's okay for Zelensky to have the, in any case, to make a coalition in the end, which is required with 226 people.
If it translates into seats. Once again, we go back to the turnout. How many people turn out? And then according to the districts, all of a sudden that 43% can drop down to 30% of the seats. Now Vakarchuk, I think, will grow, and I think the Maidan folks will gather around him. But I think the proof is in the pudding, and we'll see what the Rada looks like on August 1st.
Yeah, I was also, after Orange Revolution, I was spent a couple of years in the parliament. So I know in Ukraine there is a tradition, so-called party of power. Whoever becomes president, you are getting majority, but it's short-term, very low quality, very unreliable majority. Because the people with very wrong motivations, first thing they do, they try to play their loyalty to president. Not only members of his party, but also so-called other parties, and specifically these majoritarians, people who come from individual
Like from
constituencies.
constituencies.
So
Yeah.
he will get very shitty coalition. For example, Poroshenko got constitutional majority after his first term, 306 votes. It disappeared. I am called a coalition member for one night when you vote for the budget. And this is the biggest risk, because who will be in so-called Zelensky party? Not number, but quality, I can easily predict. There would be no politically responsible guys who could be very reliable and could guarantee support to Zelensky.
I think what's important from these figures is that Zelensky is likely to get at least some sort of coalition.
Sure.
And which, from my point of view, is going to be slightly better than we had in the previous Rada. Because previous Rada failed to do many important things. For instance, when it came to such issues like pension reform, they passed on the very basic version of pension reform and never went into details, while there are millions of pensioners in Ukraine.
Judicial, land reform, you name it.
Election reform.
Election reform.
Are many.
Secret Service reform.
Secret Service and some things in the financial sector. But what's important, who's going to be in coalition with the Servant of the People party? I think that Yulia Tymoshenko, from what she's been saying for the past 2 weeks, she's taken a pro-Zelensky stance.
Desperately trying.
Yeah, at least she's trying to say nice things, yeah, and she's looking where it heads her to. So I think Batkivshina party with 7% of the votes could join the coalition of Zelensky. And I agree with Jim that the rating of the Voice party of Sviatoslav Vakarchuk, a rock star, will probably be growing, and I don't think he wants to be in the conflict with Zelensky. He is taking a constructive approach to Ukrainian politics. It's not too much fun to be in the opposition, because all you can do is like criticize president and your colleagues in Rada on television and on Facebook, and just don't change things. So it's clearly that Petro Poroshenko bloc will be in opposition to the Zelensky party. But guys like Smeshko, I think they would think twice before going to opposition.
Yeah, but just one small. We ignored totally, or we missed these guys, clearly pro-Putin and pro-Russian. And I heard a number of attempts trying people, including on the station which you represent, in very good Ukrainian language, saying that they are very natural allies because they want peace. And they would like to stop the war. And Medvedchuk and Kremlin are really trying to make that coalition. And we shouldn't ignore that. Depending on the results, we'll be having two choices. The pro-Russian group would try to force or to push Zelensky into their alliance, and there would be others. So this still depends a lot on the result of elections.
And we really missing, for now, Народный Front. Something will definitely happen with our Volodymyr Groysman, because he definitely will. Vitaly Klitschko probably. These new parties that you've said, they are already created. They don't just understand how they will go to these elections. We have also our old radical parties, new radical parties.
Ultra-right, you mean?
Yeah, ultra-right, I mean, because ultra-left are missing in Ukraine. So these polls are really preliminary. And the problem is that I'm sure that neither Zelensky, nor even probably Poroshenko, nor Tymoshenko, they just don't know who will go in their lists. This is really a bad situation that we have because of the snap elections. One thing is low turnout. The second, that all these teams will be built just on the spot.
Too many dark horses would be there.
Maybe they just miss their time to prepare, not being kind of looking very much ahead. That's also the question for particularly Sviatoslav Vakarchuk. We have a quote of Sviatoslav Vakarchuk when he finally announced that he would run, as for almost a year everybody waited if he would run for the presidency.
Old politics means blind faith in the new president. We had this in 2004 and 2014. We have paid too high a price to realize that a new surname in president's seat is not enough. We don't place all hope on the president. We believe in the people of Ukraine. The president must be held accountable to the people. This is what we call the new politics. Our voice today sounds like this. Firstly, above all, we have the interests of the Ukrainian people. Secondly, Ukraine's existential choice is with Europe. Thirdly, the same law should apply to everybody. Number 4, we want a free economy without the oligarchs. Number 5, those in power must be held accountable to the Ukrainian citizens.
So it was quite a huge expectation when, what if a rock star would run? What if celebrity would run a year ago, and whether he would be capable? Now there is that little intrigue, because somehow Zelenskyy was a spoiler for Vakarchuk. But what do we think of the party? Because it's also interesting to mention that Vakarchuk said openly that he wouldn't include former MPs.
Regardless of who they are.
By no means, meaning that a Euro optimist who hoped somehow to cooperate with Vakarchuk wouldn't be there. So they are now, we don't know where they are.
We have to say they wouldn't be on the party list, but they may be graciously allowed to run on the individual, on the majoritarian, with support. They've given them the chance.
I just go back to who's going to be in Ukraine on July 27th. I was just at the...
Whose voters?
Yeah, which voters? I was just at the Kyiv Day event, the new bridge, and I had the feeling this is like the last party of the season, and then everyone takes off. And all the college students will go get summer jobs in the EU, and the PWEB money will be down on the beach in Odessa or Kherson or Azov or wherever. And the Yulia Tymoshenko voters who can't afford to go to the beach will be at home, and they'll be voting, and it'll be a poorer, more sedentary voter who will be in town on Sunday, July 27th.
21st so far, we know.
21st, sorry.
It's also important that the new parties will probably not be able to register observers for the election commissions. Enough observers, yeah. And that might be reasons. Though the elections we had in April, they were quite clean, so I guess this is a risk, but not such a big of a risk. And regarding the Voice Party, I think that Vakarchuk really feels that there is big demand for new faces in the politics, and you can still jump in this wave of anti-establishment mood that Zelenskyy is driving. The field of this disappointment with the traditional Ukrainian politics is huge, and it's much more. You have much more chances to do good in elections if you play on this field rather on traditional nationalistic sentiment, like Petro Poroshenko is trying to do, or conservative. Yeah. So 4.6% of Vakarchuk's rating could easily transform to 5%.
No, they are saying they are dreaming about 15, actually.
They are dreaming about the 15, and the threshold is 5%, to remind you, because there was suggestion to have it 3%, but that was not taken into account by the parliament.
I can only add to this that if we are trying to now understand what Vakarchuk will get, that's just remind you of the situation before the first election of presidency. At the beginning, we had no idea even that Zelenskyy will get into the second tour. So now we are maybe making the same mistake. So maybe that they are dreaming, maybe they are not, and we are clearly need to look at the lists first and who actually will run, especially when it goes about parties and not about the constituencies.
It's about Vakarchuk's ability to inspire, because Ukrainian politics is about inspiration. They are now emotional, not so much rational. We are trying to analyze rational factors. By rational factors, Zelenskyy had zero chance. So if Vakarchuk, today, by the way, tonight, there is grand concert of his here. If he would reach out for that audience, 18-25, because that is the most, I would say, reluctant voters to get involved into politics. Zelensky voters were 25-45, still better. So Vakarchuk's hope is to get excited this part of voters, students, young people, and he can do that. But a lot depends personally on his ability to inspire. That's what he must demonstrate.
And I just go back, he could do that in May and he could do that in September. Midsummer,
yeah, September could be better,
those
but
young
he has
people
no
may
choice
have
now.
summer jobs in the EU.
Right.
Still, let's look. There is a whole country. I said, also suggest and encourage you to watch Hromadske, because there is a huge gap between what we discuss in the studio and when we talk to the people in the regions. Hromadske now having quite a few regional bureaus, and any reports we're doing from Lviv, Kharkiv, Odessa, and Dnipro are quite a different feeling, brings quite a different feeling from what we discuss here, and kind of that things which are very much concerning about us happens to be not the concern for many people, like, for instance, the appointments. So let's coming to our most exciting part of the program. So Andrei Bogdan, a former deputy Minister for Justice, not just a Kolomoisky lawyer, is appointed as the head of the President administration, Zelensky. As well, we have the Igor Bakanov, who was former head of the party, Sluha Narodu, servant of the people, would be kind of one of the important person in the security service. And the first aide to President Zelensky would be his former business partner, now Serhiy Shafir. Besides, we can see Andrei Bogdan here, probably the only political beast in this circle of Zelensky. So there is a lot of controversy about him, because he is, and he used to be a lawyer of the Ukrainian oligarch Igor Kolomoisky, who has just back to Ukraine and has a huge feud with the Ukrainian state regarding the nationalization of the Privat Bank, one of the biggest private banks in the country. So that is quite a big issue. I should probably add that there are some other ADs. For instance, there is Ruslan Rybachuk, who was also working as the representative of the anti-corruption agency. There is Vadim Pristay, who is a Ukrainian, was a Ukrainian
new generation of
ambassador
Ukrainian
to
diplomats,
NATO. So it can't be that, because there are two little friends of Zelensky whom we know, honestly, to be appointed. So we know about three of them. What is your take on that? Oleg Borisovich, in particularly, you've been the head of the chief of staff of President Yushchenko. You know what is this work about. So how do you see these appointments?
There is the major problem in Ukraine, in the absence of political institutions in Ukrainian system, because Macron or Merkel or Trump, they are not they have some childhood friends or students area friends, but they pick up from their political parties. Our presidents are looking for friends, somebody with whom they were in prison, somebody with whom they've been playing games, and that still continues. This is the price for the fact that we still don't have political parties as institutions. That's why for 2 years, we are urging Ukraine to create conditions for political parties. His logic for me is understandable. So I guess the chief of staff, I don't predict his long-time survival, because he is the guy who should take part of negative and then would be disposed of. Usually, president changes 5, sometimes less, but one chief staff per year is a usual. But for the beginning, he is there. And Zelensky already said that he's going to replace him. If there would be a constitutional court decision, he doesn't mean some loss. But in short, the team doesn't matter so much now, because we don't have well-established traditions and we don't have anybody who could take political responsibility.
When I talked to people from Zelensky's office and asked them to describe what kind of politician Andrei Bogdan is, they told me that in our circle, Andrei Bogdan is like the most creative guy, able to come up with the important decision that we need right now. So that's why this is the reason why he got this position of the presidential chief of staff, because he's experienced enough to produce the decisions Zelensky needs to run the office on a daily basis.
He was in government, he was in advisor to parliament, but the problem is here with his moral principles.
Yeah,
and there is
with
the
his
issue.
track record. Andriy Bogdan worked in an anti-corruption institution under
Twice.
Viktor Yanukovych and Mykola Azarov for Ukraine's corrupt government in 2010-2014. And that makes Bogdan's track record quite poor. And as we all know, he's been a lawyer for Ihor Kolomoisky, that he said that he's quitting his attorney license officially to become a civil servant. And as far as I know, Zelensky is trying to build direct relationships with each deputy head of his administration. And it's not like Andriy Bogdan gives directions to all his deputies. It's like Zelensky controls all of them.
Which is very good. Here I wanted to interrupt because when I was chief of staff, I just make point there would be only 2 deputies. We had some administrations with 10 deputies, meaning that all was concentrated in the heads of chief of staff. Another point, his first assistant,
Serhiy
Shefir, this is the most trusted person. We don't have much time, but I'm pretty sure that the most sensitive, confidential issues would be treated by Shefir, not by chief of staff. And this means that Zelensky already mitigates certain risks.
Just to explain, there are 2 brothers, Shefirs. With them, they were business partners with Zelensky to run a very successful organization, Kvartal 95, and one stayed with the comedy company, and the second left the comedy company to join. So that's just for people to understand. James, that's for you time. So, but this, these are the details which a lot of people don't know because the team, it's just either 1 week or the team is not so open about these things. What are the reaction of the international community?
Well,
we heard there are
good.
issues with IMF because Kolomoisky is
Kolomoisky factor and IMF, yeah.
Not good. Just to back up a bit, we had a month between the second round of the election and the inauguration, and we heard no indications that Zelensky was interviewing what I would call the Maidan generation. In the inaugural speech, he said, I'm appealing to Uzhgorod, Luhansk, a big country, and what we have is Kryvyi Rih in Bankova, in the presidential administration. So he has not yet reached out to all the talented 30-somethings out there who can
Which
do
he
things.
promised, actually.
He promised, and let's see it. Now, right now, he's got a very limited government. The Kolomoisky connection is very negative. Just a few hours ago, the Financial Times ran this interview with Kolomoisky where he uses Greece, Argentina as role models for Ukraine, in other words, default. And that's not good, obviously. And the IMF is really the tip of the iceberg because you knock out the IMF and there goes EU money and there goes EBRD money and there goes European Investment Bank money. And more importantly, foreign investment looks very closely. Are you on track with the IMF or not? So the IMF is, once again, the tip of the iceberg. And I've talked to the head of the IMF here, and it's very clear that they will not accept. In a separate interview, Kolomoisky said to Reuters on Friday, give me 25% shares of Privat Bank and maybe we'll just drop it. Well, Kolomoisky has a record of taking a minority share and grabbing control of something.
With oil.
Can you confirm? So you talked to an IMF chief here. Mm-hmm. What was the talk about?
Well, obviously they're very cagey, but very. I think the red line is Privat Bank, which has gotten $5.5 billion in taxpayer money to be re-energized, and so they do not want to see a privatization, I guess you'd call it. They do not want to see a compensation for what everyone agrees it was the piggy bank that was looted by the former owners. So this could be, this stands out as a deal breaker for the IMF, the Privat Bank issue, and that's why people are making a big deal about it.
Yeah,
By the way, did you notice the recent statement by Yuri Lutsenko, general prosecutor? He said recently that there are no legal reasons for Privat Bank, now a state-owned institution, to claim $5.5 billion from Kolomoisky, since he still has the deadline to pay off all the loans he owes. And this is, I think, a very basic example of how old-style politicians try to satisfy oligarchs
Changing
like
political
Kolomoisky,
colors.
thinking that this will bring them political prospects.
Yeah, but what is
Exactly.
important to say why we are talking about the bank? There are so many banks. This is not just one of the banks.
the biggest bank.
This is the bank which has more than 30% of deposit of households.
It's huge.
So why IMF is so focused on that bank? Because the future of that bank may collapse the whole banking system. So our viewers should realize it's not just one of the banks.
Yeah, it's system risk.
Yeah,
and actually, I
system
think about
risks.
half the population has accounts there.
Yeah, there was.
I mean, I use Privat Bank all the time. Everyone does. Many people do.
We are at this position of a moment of history or our current affairs where there really a lot of political guessing because either it's too short or we just don't know. So yeah, it's interesting just to remind that the general prosecutor Lutsenko had been asked publicly to resign. Just a couple of days ago, another deputy head of current administration, Ruslan Rybachuk, said that in the private meeting, Zelenskyy asked Lutsenko to leave.
And publicly he asked him to
so
leave.
kind of both. But let's see. As we understand where is this policy of deals. Still, maybe just let us still explain more about influence on Kolomoisky. What are still the red lines? How we can measure this? Because I guess it's everybody who everything. Our politics today, kind of a Kolomoisky guessing. He comes to giving numbers of interviews, telling how important he is.
Yeah, because I have monopoly here. I don't think that you had the chances to talk to this guy for hours. I did when I was chief of staff. So in short, what I say, this is not the person who is press eager, talk to press. He is not at all open politician. The fact that he is giving more interviews in the last couple of months than in all his previous years means for me that he's bluffing a lot. If this guy had a strong say on Zelensky, he would never and ever demonstrate this. The fact that he's so a bit even hysterical or very obviously nervous, he is trying to press. Therefore, I predict that there is unavoidable clash with Kolomoisky because he is the biggest political risk for President Zelensky, and therefore I was trying to present appointment of Bogdan from different point of view. Probably Bogdan could be the best advocate of President Zelensky against very bully oligarch, because who better than advocate knows all the loops and sins and dirty linen of Kolomoisky. I don't know, but something tells me that pretty soon we will be seeing this conflict. Maybe after that, Bogdan would perform his mission like on the first stage of the rocket. You know, you get president somewhere on different, and then you are burnt and gone.
Yes, but we know that Zelensky's #1 media backer was 1+1, Igor Kolomoisky's TV, and he's been on that channel for 10 years. And we know from the flight records that I think Radio Svoboda dug up that Zelensky flew maybe 15 times, first to
we all know
Zurich
that.
and then to Tel Aviv. So it's a very close relationship.
So very
there.
briefly, I've been talking to Horoshkovsky, there's another name. Zelensky is the guy whom any media owner would die to have. Inter, the most popular channel. So Kolomoisky can't say that he picked up the weak guy and stuffed him with money and make him great. So any media, any TV channel would love to have business project like Zelensky. So this is not the argument. I know it is often used because I know from the first hand that Zelensky doesn't own. Moreover, commercially, Kolomoisky is the guy who always try not to bear all the financial commitments.
He said now that in this recent interview to Financial Times that he owes $8 million to Zelensky company.
Yeah,
But
so
Kolomoisky, rarely he admits he owns something.
Yes, so it's vice versa.
You know, what's interesting, right after being elected, Zelensky had a meeting with Viktor Pinchuk, another oligarch, and a long time
And made it public.
Owner
enemy
of 3 TV channels, even syndicate.
of Kolomoisky. So
Right,
I think this was a move
to mitigate.
And
the
to
risk.
show that okay, I'm president, but I'm diversifying my relations with oligarchs, with big businesses that work here in Ukraine.
That definitely will happen, but I guess it will be after the parliamentary election.
Sure.
Because we cannot change the channel just like this. So for another 2 months, we will see how Kolomoisky and Zelensky will try to get some balance of the interests. And after Zelensky will get a coalition or get the majority even, I don't know, it will be a much different situation between him and Kolomoisky.
Zelensky announced a meeting with all businesses, which Kolomoisky objected to. Kolomoisky demanded exclusiveness. He says, oh, we are not collective farm. And this is also the discussions. So we should expect from Zelensky this open meeting, because frankly, with all his inexperiences in politics, when he speaks about basic problems of investors, you can see that he knows what he's talking about.
Can you get a bit maybe also on that, because there are what would besides the private bank, because I guess that's the point, that it's one issue which overshadows everything with the reason, with absolute the reasons, but because we devote so much time and things might happen differently, we just totally don't go into anything else.
Well,
so what would be, generally give us a feeling, what are the other expectations?
Well, Natalia, the great expectation is that he will reform the judiciary. You know, we can credit Poroshenko with the central bank and maybe health. Some people don't like that, but there have been several real reforms that Poroshenko did. He never got to the judiciary. And so if you can establish a real judiciary, putting real people in real jail cells, and you know, setting fences, electric fences, like don't go here, don't go there, that would make all investors, not just foreign investors, a lot happier. But the FDI, the foreign direct investment here, is anemic. It's very low.
So politically, election from business point, it's independent court.
Yeah, exactly.
Basic, most important.
That's the big hope.
One topic I would like to, particularly for our audience, to raise and to give also a quote. Another scandal, a huge scandal, it's regarding the U.S.-Ukraine elections, Ukraine-U.S. relations, I'm sorry, my apology, which somehow in Ukraine is overshadowed by so many things which are happening this week. We're speaking about the fact that Rudy Giuliani, a lawyer of U.S. President Donald Trump, was supposed to travel to Ukraine, and he kind of accused Ukrainian MP Leshchenko, who is a member of the team of Zelensky, on
being the enemy of the state.
Meddling into the elections, because there was an issue of the Manafort and the Ledger's book had been opened there. So that was there. We've discussed it. By the way, if you would like to, if you missed that last week, Serhiy Leshchenko has been in this studio and opened all the questions in detail. So you can find it on our webpage, in.hromadske.ua. But another story was about the Joe Biden and the company Burisma, which on the board of this company there was son of Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and there was some kind of negotiation, and it's also the kind of a discussion for Rudy Giuliani that there was something wrong. So we get into the U.S.-Ukraine inner politics in both cases. But before we reflect on that, I'd like to we had a chance to talk this week to Oliver Barlow, who is the British investigative reporter and who is the author of the book Moneyland, and he used to investigate the case of Burisma and the case of Zlochevsky way before everybody talked about that.
Ex-minister of Parliament of Yanukovych.
So let's see all the things how Oliver Barlow also answers the discussion Rudy Giuliani had started.
There is no connection between these two facts. Hunter Biden one of his jobs was to work for a Ukrainian businessman, a former minister in the Yanukovych's administration. That's one fact. The other fact is that Joe Biden was in charge of Ukraine policy for the White House and demanded that the general prosecutor of Ukraine be sacked. But the general prosecutor of Ukraine was not actively investigating the company for which Hunter Biden worked. There was no possible advantage to Hunter Biden from Shokin, the general prosecutor, being fired. There was definitely Joe Biden interfered in Ukrainian politics and demanded the sacking of the prosecutor. That's undoubtedly interference. Frankly, I think possibly not very attractive the way he's boasted about doing that. But there was no interference in the business interests or on behalf of the business interests of his son. This just did not happen. Chronology is, one, there's the revolution in Ukraine. Yanukovych runs away. Zlochevsky is left without a political, patron, as it were, because he was from that team. Two, he hires Hunter Biden and Devon Archer and Kwasniewski from Poland to be on the board of his gas company. 3, there is a conference in London to discuss the return of money to Ukraine that had been stolen by the previous regime. This was co-hosted by the US and the UK. At that conference, the British government, Theresa May, the now Prime Minister, announced that the British authorities had frozen $23 million of Ukrainian origin. At that point, we didn't know it was Zlochevsky's money, but that was Zlochevsky's money. Then there is a court case in London at the end of 2014 at which the Serious Fraud Office, the British investigative agency, tried to maintain the asset freeze on this $23 million and were unable to do so. And a key reason why they were unable to do so is that Zlochevsky's lawyers produced a letter from the Ukrainian Prosecutor General which said there is no suspicion against this man. He is not charged with any crimes in Ukraine, which meant that the British judge decided there were no grounds to maintain a freezing order on $23 million. The money was released and vanished off into the world economy. This case, not only the failure to help the British authorities, but an active undermining of the case in the UK is one of the reasons why the American authorities thought that the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office needed serious reform. But it wasn't the only case. There were multiple examples where Shokin and Shokin's team acted ineffectively and failed to investigate corruption. And so Joe Biden demanded that from President Poroshenko. He demanded that Shokin be fired and that a new prosecutor be appointed if Biden wanted to receive a $1 billion loan. So those are the facts as they're laid out. Now we get to the point, 5 years after the Maidan, we get to the point when Rudy Giuliani is claiming that the interference from Biden in Ukrainian politics, the insistence that Shokin was fired, was motivated by the business interests of his son Hunter. But that's not the case. They are concerned that Joe Biden will be a very serious competitor for Donald Trump in next year's presidential election. If he becomes the Democratic candidate, they're clearly most worried about him as a prospect. And everyone is always throwing the word Russia at Trump, so they want the word Ukraine to throw back again. That's all. There was a time when all American politicians from all parties would have seen it as their duty to support a small European country that's trying to build democracy and trying to break free of Moscow's control, but that appears to no longer be the case.
So the full version of the interview with Oliver Bellow you can find on our webpage en.hromadske.ua. And probably like to finalize things, this is a big issue which overshadow the Ukraine-US relations because there would be elections in the US for the next year. And doesn't matter what, Zelenskyy should deal somehow with that. So probably, James, for you, just to let us know how to look at the whole thing.
Well, it's politics, and that's why the U.S. ambassador was pulled out 2 months early. Because, as Oliver Bellow said, Trump identifies Joe Biden as his biggest threat. So I think sensible people realize that the chronology doesn't add up. There's no case there. The problem is, in Trump world, if you throw enough mud at the wall, some will stick, and maybe 25% of the Republicans will believe, oh, Ukraine bad, and so it's not good for Ukraine. Whether it'll go for, frankly, I think it's good. It's all being played out now, 18 months before the election, but there will be sort of a lasting bad taste in some Republicans' mouths about Ukraine, unfortunately.
The irony here is that Ukrainian diaspora in the States are mostly pro-Republican or strong supporters of
Republicans. But they're not quite as influential as they are in Canada.
Right, but what I'm saying. But here, I was at that meeting with Biden, very small meeting where he explained all the reasons. I would say here, as Ukrainian, the biggest stupidity of people like Attorney General Lutsenko was to try to get into crossfire between Democrats and Republicans. It's very naive. It's unforgivable. It was never the case in the history, but now it happened. So we have to limit this factor immediately, and it would be challenging because Trump administration is really enforcing it. But we have to draw lessons, and I hope very much that Lutsenko would not be would not remain in this chair because it's embarrassing domestically and internationally.
And you know, when here in Kiev, I talked to the US diplomats unofficially. Sometimes they would say something like, I want to take a really pro-Ukrainian stance on the matters of Ukrainian domestic policy. But the man in the White House wouldn't allow me to do all the number of things I want to do. So we need to understand that there is some tension between the State Department and the White House, because all these career US diplomats, they are much more, I'd say, liberal and open-minded than the traditional direction of Trump's foreign policy. And of course, Trump is mad that President Petro Poroshenko was said to be a supporter of Hillary Clinton during the 2016 elections. And Trump usually takes all political threats personally. If you support my rival, then you are my personal rival. That's Trump's logic.
I frankly think that when the tax returns come out, we may well see that the man who sits in the White House owes $800 million to Russian banks, to Deutsche Bank. That we have a huge conflict of interest here if you disconnect the dots.
But the bottom line of the discussion is the story we have to watch out. Unfortunately, it's there. It won't just evaporate somehow. So thanks a lot for the discussion. But I would like to ask you very shortly to finalize it, to see what will you be watching out within the next couple of weeks, because there is so much buzz. Some things are important, some to a less extent. So maybe you'll
First, it's what will happen as to the lists, which party are actually running, who goes with whom. That will be the most interesting and dramatic part. The second, if Zelenskyy will appoint anyone else, because when he appoints people from business or from comedy into this, maybe not from comedy, but
from his business, yeah.
But still his friends into Secret Service, this is really a bad sign, because when he says, oh guys, I will bring new politicians to you, that doesn't mean that these guys should not be professionals, specifically on these positions. Because Bogdan is really a professional guy, but these two appointments were really bad signs.
Out of 6 Ukrainian presidents, only one managed, at the very beginning, Kuchma, managed to use his legitimate 2 terms, which is a very good lesson to every next president. What I admire in my country, in my country's voters, that they do not forget undelivered promises. And we circulate, or we process corrupted political Ukrainian elites. With each process, as they are getting slightly better. Of course, I wanted to have new election law and the creation of parties which would become real parties quicker. But still, if you ask me, I would not hesitate again to not to vote for Poroshenko and support non-systemic president.
I'll really see who the choices are. For the foreign investment community and Delhi for the local domestic investment community, Oleksandr Daniluk gave enormous credibility to Zelenskyy.
By the way,
and Ivanis also.
Yeah, he was appointed for the Security Council.
Secretary of the... Secretary.
I'm not quite sure what that means. I mean, we know he was Minister of Finance. We know he has a banking, financial London background, and why is he playing top cop? I'm not quite sure what that means.
It's not top cop. It's the only advisory board. There is no mentioning of president's administration in anywhere. The instrument which president can play is this National Security Council. But I can tell you that usually National Security Council is losing in politics vis-a-vis administration of president. Maybe he could be reappointed from that position also.
Yeah, I mean, it may be a placeholder and then he'll become Minister of Finance or Economy.
Yeah.
And then Ivanis, who's sort of dropped a little bit under the radar. And going back to the wonderful Maidan generation, those 25 to 35, 25 to 40-year-olds who are pro-European, modern people, let's bring them back in for a second chance.
But that they should be elected on different
Some
parties,
will,
brands, or constituencies?
It's for Ukraine. It's a little bit difficult to live in a time of political volatility, right? We get new president, we get snap parliamentary elections, and the future of cabinet ministers, if not now, is Rada is going to vote for dismissal of Volodymyr Groysman, the prime minister. So usually, economy and business, they do not like elections, and they do not like political volatility because investors' confidence goes low. And then people start to save money rather than spend it. But overall, I think that Ukraine does need changes. And personally, I was very unhappy with the quality of the previous parliament, of the previous Verkhovna Rada. So I would even say that any kind of changes is good for Ukraine because Ukraine is a developing democracy. And if things go stable for 10 years and you don't have change of leadership, political leadership for 10 years, then you get post-Soviet democracy like Belarus or Kazakhstan. So for Ukraine, Ukraine does need changes. Whether Zelensky will be able to do everything he's promised, well, we'll have to see. And I think with the pace of his decisions that we see from him right now, it won't take too much time to understand what is true in Volodymyr Zelensky and what he says.
In a couple of months.
Yeah,
So,
probably.
Thanks a lot for the brilliant discussion, and we will be back in a week. I'll just say that between these, please read our articles at en.hromadsky.ua. You can sign up for our newsletter and receive the weekly updates as well. You can support Hromadsky, use the button donate, so the independent journalism will thrive in our capacity. And as well, we are there 24/7 for you on social media at Twitter and at Facebook, so search Hromadsky International, and really get some nuances of the Ukrainian politics, which today matters for not just for Ukraine, but for the whole region. So with that, I say goodbye.
Yeah.